What's up, YouTube? This is True Raw for TV. All right. So before I get into this video, I want to give a shout out to Ticket TV for his live stream earlier. All right, he was talking about this subject. That's when I found out about this. If you guys are not subscribed to Ticket TV, please subscribe to Ticket TV. All right. Check out his other channels, and also check out and subscribe to his Patreon. All right. So shout out to Ticket, shout out to LB, Mojave Sports Nation, shout out to the whole entire LDBC. I want to make one uh, comment because I had a couple of friends of mine tell me about this. Um, Let me know if you are commenting on my channel and they're not coming through, um, or they're not appearing. It's not on my end. YouTube has a lot of funny shenanigans going on right now. Whereas, I've commented on people's pages and it's not showing up. Um, and it's nothing that I'm writing or I'm assuming anybody else is writing that's against YouTube's policy. But for some reason, it seems like YouTube is erasing people's comments off of pages. You know what I'm saying? So let me know if that's going on with some of you guys too, because it's not me erasing comments. So I just want to know if that's like a bigger problem than even I thought was going on in the past. Let me know if that's going on, okay? Um, so Isaiah Thomas said that Michael Jordan was number 5 in his estimation as far as toughest players to have gone against in his career. Um, he said this during a podcast with Shannon Sharp called Club Shay Shay. Thomas ranked the 5 toughest players that he played against during his career. He ranked Jordan number 5, behind Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Larry Bird, and Julius Erving. He said, just head to head, I was dominant over him until 91 when I basically had career-ending wrist surgery. Up until then, my record against him and his team, it really wasn't competition there. He goes on to say, he just wasn't my competition. My focus was Bird, Magic, Dr. J, Kareem. Those were the guys. I don't care what anybody says. You can go back and look at history. Those were the guys. Well, you know, aside from the fact that Isaiah Thomas himself, on multiple occasions, has said that he felt that Jordan was a goat. You know, it is what it is. Like I said before on my channel, people can have their own opinions about who they think is the greatest. The problem with Isaiah is that it's obvious that he harbors resentment toward Jordan. Um, as recently as a couple of weeks ago, he extended an olive branch to Jordan. So obviously, there's something there that you feel like you think needs to be uh, corrected or squashed, extinguished. Jordan doesn't seem to have any interest in doing that. So it seems quite natural, given the history that Isaiah has displayed, that he's going to be even more fervent in his anti-Jordan rhetoric right now. It's cool, But I just want to say this though. I agree with Isaiah to an extent. I don't know if that's shocking to people, but I agree with Isaiah to an extent that Jordan wasn't his main competition. Okay. And it is true when the Pistons were at their apex or coming into their own 86, 87, 88, and then champions 89 and 90, their main competition for the most part were the Lakers and then, the Celtics. Now, as far as the Sixers are concerned, by 85, Philly was starting to fall off. Philly was more of a dominant team in the early into the mid 80s. But it has nothing to do with Charles Barkley. But around the time that Charles Barkley was acquired, Moses was starting to fall from superstar status to more of an all-star level player, although he would remain an all-star level player for many years. But the years of Moses being a guy putting up 28 and 16 were coming to an end, and he was more of a guy putting up 22 and 11 for a couple of years. Andrew Toney began to have injuries. Dr. J was getting older, so that team started falling to the wayside slowly but surely through in the mid to late 80s. But the main competition was Boston. Um, of course, the Lakers as far as finals potential matchup. And another team that doesn't get mentioned is the Milwaukee Bucks. They never won a title, so therefore they're not in the same ballpark, but they were the best team in the NBA 1980s not to make it to the NBA Finals ever in that decade. So yeah, I would say 80% of what is saying is correct. Michael wasn't on the radar in that aspect. However, Isaiah to me is not being honest by him saying that Mike wasn't on his radar at all. I mean, all you have to do is look at the record. Zeke is from Chicago, born and raised. Jordan was born in Brooklyn, grew up in North Carolina in the South. Jordan had no connections to the city of Chicago before he was drafted. The fact that Jordan, in a short amount of time, became a star, then superstar, then an icon in Chicago, while Isaiah, being born there, you know what I'm saying, Chicago bred basketball player, strong ties to the Chicago area, but yet became enemy number one in his own hometown, persona non grata, that had to burn him. Imagine if you were an athlete and you grew up where you grew up at, and you became public enemy number one there. That would affect you some type of way, especially if you got love for where you grew up at, where I know he does. He also didn't like the fact that he played in Indiana, right? Even though some people thought he should have went to DePaul, his good friend Mark Aguirre, who later be his teammate with Detroit, they all said he should go to DePaul. Bobby Knight's a racist. He's crazy. Da 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 da. He thought that Bobby Knight had a similar mentality to him, and they did. And even though they bumped heads at first, ultimately Bobby Knight would tell you Isaiah was his guy. They were really, really tight, really tight. To hear Bobby Knight say in 1984 when he was the coach of that Olympic team, for him to hear Bobby Knight say Michael's the best player I've ever seen, a guy that coached him, Isaiah, that burned him. There is sufficient evidence to suggest that in the 85 All Star game, there was a conspiracy to freeze Mike out of that game to make him look bad. A lot of people resented the fact that they didn't think that Jordan earned all of the adulation he was getting. He was just a rookie, he hadn't done anything to earn that respect. So all the veterans, Isaiah and George Gervin, all those guys, they resented what he was getting, and they freezed him. Okay, so to say that Jordan wasn't on his radar as a player, that's not accurate. Maybe not as far as competition, but he did not like Jordan. Okay. Um, Another thing that gets misconstrued is that the Pistons just constantly thwarted Jordan. That they shut him down, and throughout history, throughout that entire '80s span, the Pistons were just no match. That's not true. Jordan used to light that team up. It honestly didn't become harder for Mike until Detroit acquired guys like John Sally, Dennis Rodman, um, initially Adrian Dantley, later on Mark Aguirre. When they became the bad boys, and then they truly began to focus entirely a game plan, a sophisticated, but not so sophisticated, but a scheme to slow down Jordan, right? It wasn't until then that the Jordan rules or their strategy began to work. Before that, when Charles Oakley was Chicago, the enforcer, right? Jordan used to light that team up. And I'm just going to give you some games. Okay. Isaiah Thomas is 24 and 19 against Michael. Now, that's not exactly dominating. Now, that's a winning record, but that's not like a dominating record against Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. But look, just looking at some of these games that Mike had against this team. He had a 32-point game. Another game, we had 33 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, 33, 47, 38, uh, let's see, 61, 59, 48, 47. Yeah. Is that really slowing? Does that sound like you shutting somebody down? You know what I'm saying? It's ridiculous. It wasn't until Chicago traded Charles Oakley, right? Because they felt like Horace Grant would be an upside in the power forward position. But they were green, they were young, they weren't mentally tough yet for the NBA. And the Pistons took advantage of that. And they started beating up on Jordan. And that's when, you know what I'm saying, that's when you could say, well, maybe they were slowing Mike down. But even during the Jordan rules years, let's say 88 to 90, Mike was still averaging 30 points a game against that team. And his efficiency was a little bit lower, but it was 47% against that team. It's not terrible. That's not shutting somebody down. So, you know, this aspect that the Pistons shut him down is very overrated. You know what I'm saying? As a matter of fact, I'm gonna tell you something that's interesting to me about Shannon Sharpe and all these guys that like to bring this up. It's funny to me that they always talk about the Pistons, right? And Isaiah talking about he was dominant over Mike, which is not true. But yet, if you talk about the big three Celtics, right, and Paul Pierce saying, well, look, I don't look at LeBron like that because I remember when we were kicking LeBron's ass. Oh, man, what are you talking about? Oh, he's been to 10 NBA finals. And man, he's got 4 NBA championships. And you're nothing compared to him. You're nothing. You're going to bow down. And how dare you don't have him as your top 5 all time player? And how this and that. But isn't this a similar situation? I'm not saying Paul Pierce is on the same level as Isaiah Thomas, but Isaiah Thomas isn't as great as Michael Jordan, right? But what we're saying is, and what he's saying is, he just didn't see at that time Mike on his radar. So when Paul Pierce is saying, look, back in 2007, 2008, LeBron was a great individual player, but on our radar, we had the Lakers, you know what I'm saying? We had, maybe the Mavericks. In the East, we had more like the Pistons, Chauncey Billups and those guys. We had the Nets. We weren't looking at that team like that, even though they did go to the finals that year before that. But more like, that was kind of a lucky thing, you know what I'm saying? I don't want to dismiss that, but the finals kind of proved that was more of a fluky thing, okay? Paul Pierce and them is saying, we had that team's number. We had LeBron's number to the point where we made LeBron James leave Cleveland and go to Miami. But when you bring that up, you know, it is what it is. I want to see something right quick. I want to see a head-to-head finder between Paul Pierce and LeBron James. I never looked. I don't think I've ever looked that up before. I wouldn't be surprised if LeBron has a winning record. But I just want to see how close it is. Well, I'll be damned. Paul Pierce has a winning record against LeBron James, 21-18. Hmm, interesting. Now, statistically, LeBron is dominant, 29.3 points, 6.7 rebounds, 6.5 assists, 1.9 steals to Pierce's 20.2, 5.6 rebounds, 5.9 assists. But is that eerily similar? Statistically, Michael was much more dominant than Isaiah, but the record goes to Paul Pierce. Hmm. So it's a similar situation, but if you have anybody say, look, man, Paul Pierce just didn't look at LeBron like that. Oh, man, he's hating. Man, he's hating. I don't know. I'm just saying. Um, and look, Isaiah Thomas is a tremendous player, man. Tremendous player. Um, I have him as the third greatest point guard of all time behind only Magic Johnson and Oscar Robertson. But let's put some facts out here. After the 86-87 season, Isaiah Thomas never again was in the top 10 in MVP voting. Top 10. Did you hear me? Top 10. Now I can understand maybe not top two or top three, but top 10 in MVP voting ever again after 86-87. And someone said this in the chat. It's true. You can make the argument that by the late 80s, Isaiah may not have been the actual best player on that team. I would even argue that technically you could say Joe Dumars was the best player on that team. He was their best defensive player. He was their best shooter, one of their best scorers, and their most dynamic player they had, even though he didn't win a title with them, was Adrian Dantley. But you can't question that Jordan was the best player on those Bulls teams, right? And when you want to talk about a loaded team, you had Joe Dumars, who's extraordinarily underrated. He's still the all-time three pointers made leader for Detroit, even though he retired over 20 years ago, and we're in this 3-point trigger happy era. But Joe Dumars, I think, still leads the team in three pointers made, if I'm not mistaken. So you have Joe Dumars, you have Isaiah Thomas, you have Dennis Rodman. All right. For a spell, you had Adrian Dantley, one of the most underrated scorers. You had Mark Aguirre, who was a perennial All Star. He's not a Hall of Famer, but you can make a case he should be, or at least a borderline case. They had James Buddha Edwards. He wasn't no scrub. You had John Sally. You had Rick Mahorn. They had a squad. Then you had the microwave come off the bench, Benny Johnson. Then you had Bill Laimbeer, great rebounder. I hate his guts as a Bulls fan. You hate his fucking guts, but he was a solid player, great rebounder. He was dirty, but he was a great rebounder. All right. And he had a rare skill for that era, being a guy that could shoot from the outside. He had 3-point range. In 1990, he set a record at the time for 5 3-pointers in the game against Portland. But let's look at the Bulls, okay? Starting in '88, they played the Detroit Pistons 4 consecutive seasons, right? In '88, I think they lost in the semis in 5 games to the Detroit Pistons. I think it was the semis, if I'm not mistaken. In '89, they lost to the Pistons in 6. In the conference finals, I believe. And in 1990, they took the Pistons to 7 games, right? Took them to 7 games. Portland, which most people will tell you in their mind, oh man, they're a more loaded team than Chicago. Detroit beat them in 5, whereas the Bulls took them to 7 games. What you were seeing was a process of the Bulls getting better and better and better. But people had this narrative back then that, scoring champions don't win titles. Um, Scottie Pippen was soft. They were the Jordan and the Jordanaires. Phil Jackson was overrated as a coach. They should have never left. They should have never fired Doug Collins. And then the next year, they won a title. Now you can argue that they benefited from injuries. You can make that argument. Isiah Thomas hurt his wrist. He had surgery, which forever kind of hindered him a little bit. Um, Boston at one point in the season had the best record in the NBA, 29-5, but injuries, especially Larry Bird, caused them to finish at 56-26 that year. They weren't the same toward the end of the season. Okay, you can say Chicago benefited from injuries, but everybody's benefited from injuries. Okay, I can make a case for every championship team. They benefited from injuries from some way. Detroit benefited from injuries in '89. Okay, they didn't have Magic Johnson to contend with in the finals for the most part. They had Jeff fucking Lamp at point guard. Okay, but I don't bring that up all the time because you don't want to take away from the Pistons' greatness. But it seems like people are on this thing now. They want to always take away from someone's greatness by bringing up injury here, a bad call here. You just see it. Like people don't want to take their losses. You see it in politics. You got these Trump supporters that still harboring about election fraud, but you didn't see that until they fell behind. Why didn't you argue about election fraud the day of the election? See, in 1960 and any other election where there's evidence of voter fraud, the claims were being made on that day before votes were even coming out. There would be reports of irregularities, reports of voter intimidation, voter suppression, whatever. Mysteriously, with these Trump supporters, these reports didn't come out until Trump's lead began to narrow. But back to basketball, man. Isiah Thomas is a phenomenal player. But the reason why he's not on that same level as a Magic and Larry and Michael is most of his own self doing. He burnt so many bridges with players. He ruined so many relationships to the point where it was almost unanimous, if not unanimous, that no one wanted him on the dream team. Remember, Chuck Daly was the coach of that team. Chuck Daly, the Detroit Pistons coach. He was the coach of that team. Isiah's coach. Don't you think if anybody could have gotten Isiah, that could have turned some people's minds around, it could have been Chuck Daly? People got to really remember. Look, don't get me wrong. Isiah Thomas has done a lot for the black community. This isn't some video where I'm shitting on him not being aware of what he's done for the community. He should be commended for that. But at the same time, I do believe in accountability and responsibility, and a lot of that was Isiah's own doing. Now, at the same time, you can make the argument, that maybe the other players should have forgiven and been bigger. But at the time, passions were still high. Okay. Magic, and it's not just Jordan. People keep making it a Jordan Isiah thing, but the Magic Zeke angle is probably hotter. They were best friends. Then Magic finds out that a guy that was his best friend, just because they fell off, he's going around telling people that he's a homosexual, he's a faggot, and I wouldn't want to play with him. No, that's why for almost 30 years they didn't talk to each other. So look, at the end of the day, um, if he thinks that it's the fifth number five as far as the competition is concerned, I understand what his angle is with that. But what the thing that make him lose credibility is when he says, or he continues to harp now that Michael really wasn't that high up as far as respect or where he ranks him, and we have him on record when he was an analyst with NBC saying he thought Jordan was the GOAT then when all those other guys had retired. And recently, as a couple of years ago, he said Jordan was the GOAT. Now, I can understand him changing his mind with LeBron because LeBron has achieved more. So I can see him if he would say, look, I think it's LeBron now. I would get that. But now, but why would you all of a sudden say, well, I think Julius Herbert's the GOAT. I think Kareem's the GOAT. But you didn't say that in 1998. They already retired. They weren't still playing. So what changed your mind? Or do you have an agenda? And why would you go to Shannon Sharp's show when we all know that we know Shannon. Come on, man. It's so easy to connect. It's too easy. But tell me what you guys think.